We're live. All right, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to Cyber Resilience 101, Bouncing Back Like a Pro. I'm Jason Vanzin, the founder of Right Hand Technology Group. We are a security and compliance focused MSP and spend a lot of time helping companies tackle cybersecurity and compliance, particularly CMMC. I'll be moderating today's conversation and jumping in as it makes sense. But we wanted to get this panel set up. We want it to feel more like a conversation we have at conferences, peer groups, with other cybersecurity nerds. So we talk about, we talk about what works, what doesn't work, what we want our clients to really be thinking about. So we thought, why not invite our clients and prospects to listen in on the conversations? Hopefully you'll walk away with something practical and insightful. Cybersecurity, as you know, is not going anywhere. It's getting more complex. It's getting more target rich. AI is making it easier for both the good guys and the bad guys. And that's why we're here talking not just about defense, but about resilience, the ability to recover, to adapt, and to bounce back. We got a great panel with us today. So let's go around and make intros. And just a heads up for everyone listening, if you have some questions, you can just drop them in the Q&A or you can raise your hand at the end of the panel. We'll answer whatever questions we can. So let's jump through the panel here and introduce everybody. You want to start off, Dan?
Sure. Yeah, I'm Daniel Umek. I'm the Director of Operations at Alpha and Omega Computer Consultants. We're located in the greater Nashville, Tennessee area. I know most of these guys for a while, and yeah, that's basically me.
I'm Josh Tozer. I'm the Chief Information Security Officer for More Power Technology Group. We're an MSP that focuses a lot in HIPAA and CGIS compliance in the Pacific Northwest area, so Southwest Washington.
Tony Messerschmidt with Embark, located in the Des Moines, Iowa area. I'm Chief Operating Officer, so in charge of service delivery and making sure we meet and exceed expectations with our clients, from IT support to cybersecurity.
All right, I'm John Douglas, Pileus Technologies, based in Wichita, Kansas. I'm the president, owner, CEO, whatever you want to call me, chief bottle washer. And like I said, Pileus Technologies, we're a security-focused MSP out of Wichita, Kansas.
All right, good deal. I'm going to try and keep us on track today. Like I said, I'll throw in my thoughts as kind of as we jump between topics. Hopefully we can keep everything on track and not turn this into a Joe Rogan podcast for 3 hours. So this is what we're going to cover here, but I'll just kind of jump straight into it. So cybersecurity threats are everywhere. So one of the first things we like to tell our clients is it's not a matter of are you going to deal with an attack? It's a matter of when. Phishing, ransomware, social engineering, these are everywhere. And the sad reality is, unless you're, at least what we see is unless you're forced to do something about it, many times businesses won't act until it's too late. So what I kind of want to do is kick it off to you guys and see what are the most common threats you guys are seeing out there at prospects and clients. Anybody want to jump in first?
Yeah. So for us, where we've been seeing the most is the threats against user identities, credentials being harvested, privileged business intelligence, unauthorized cloud access, really just a lot of phishing campaigns and scooped credentials, coming a lot from just the various breaches that have happened around larger organizations. You kind of get your mailer lists from that, and that has been just the single most common attack vector we've been seeing for the last 18 months.
Yeah, we second that too. It's just easiest point of entry, right? It's not necessarily the devices as much as it is who's behind the devices anymore that makes it such a easy, simple target to quietly sneak in, grab what you want, and get out.
Yeah, I mean, just like the other guys are saying, phishing is always going to be, the go-to for your average hacker. What we have seen an increase of in the last year and a half or so is more attacks that are focused on authentication processes and actually like spamming authentication requests and trying to capture, the token for the session there So if you have your phone for the uninitiated and you just keep getting requests for you to authenticate into your email or something, and that's not you, you're probably going under attack, and you don't want to answer those. And the idea there is that the hacker wants you to just get so frustrated that you hit the buttons that you would hit to make it go away, and then they can get in. And we see that a lot more now than we've ever seen before. So
it's amazing how much anymore. It seems like business email compromises are becoming more and more prevalent. And we are always going to our clients. Trying to get our customers trained and get their end users trained. To look for all those things. Look for the phishing emails and whatnot, and try to get all that squashed.
Yeah, I know. Even beyond phishing, we see it. With vishing, like people calling, texting. I mean, it's actually, I just gonna be sharing out actually, I can't remember if it's an article or a carousel about Zoom meetings being used to trick people. Like basically, I mean, think about it, you can kind of start a conversation on LinkedIn with somebody, set up a meeting with them. You think they're a legit business of some sort. And then they're trying to convince you to, hey, just share out your screen and let me do X, Y, and Z. So anyways, but yeah, there's, I always get worried about my family. Like, holy crap, when's my wife or my kid going to click on something they shouldn't and, tarnish my cybersecurity credentials. But
that and my grandparents, that's another one.
Yeah. Is there, what do you guys think as far as like the effects on small businesses versus large enterprises? Do you see any differences of how, it affects smaller companies versus larger companies?
We've noticed
Sorry, Josh.
We've noticed it being a lot more prevalent and impactful with the smaller clients because they don't necessarily have the budget to impose in zero trust email and cybersecurity like training, like phishing training campaigns and stuff like that. So more and more we are seeing people kind of sign up for them because they're seeing the impact the end user training is having on it. But our larger organizations kind of have a better toolkit available to them and policies in place to help define what their users should be doing day to day.
Yeah, I was just going to kind of say the same thing as like really the scope of it for a small business can be catastrophic. It can literally shut down their business. It does, every day. That's a reality of it. And kind of like Josh was saying, it's just they don't have the level of control in place to limit and mitigate the damage. And, that's kind of where we come in. We're the best chance that they have, against that sort of thing. But if they don't have anything in place and they don't have the right type of insurance, and, it could be really, really bad for sure.
Yes,
I think that. Go ahead, Tony.
I was going to just add to that too. And I think that across the board, the levels of penalties that are going up don't really care if you're a small to large business anymore. So as the government steps in with different sorts of regulations, the loss of personal identifiable information and other critical data, not only is the hack, going to potentially take down a business for countless days, but it's also going to come on the backside and open you up to litigation, not just from individuals from the lost data, but also from government regulations. So
I think the common misconception, right now is, the small player, isn't going to be hit, and that's quite false. I met with a prospect actually this morning who actually said that, it's a potential healthcare client, and they're, they do stuff at the hospitals, and they're like, well, they're going after the hospitals, they're not going after us. And I was like, well, actually, it's actually quite wrong. They are absolutely going after you because you don't have the budget that the hospital has. Yeah. And once you say that, then the face kind of goes, oh, shoot, I didn't realize that.
One of the things I like to tell my clients is security through obscurity does not exist anymore. It just doesn't.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I would say honestly, if I look at like 70% of the sales engagements that we've had, over the last year, they've all come on the back of some recent sort of cyber incident that was significant, that took the business down for maybe even a couple of days or up to a week at a time. And so 70% of the small businesses I'm meeting with are being affected. If you're in that ballpark, if you haven't been affected, it's probably only a matter of time if the right infrastructure and sort of controls aren't in place.
Yeah, it kind of goes back to what we were just talking about previously, the common types. I mean, I don't think it seems like almost every company I talked to had a business email compromise at some point, so.
Mhm.
So, all right. I guess, for the audience, if you guys, I guess what's most concerning cyber threat you guys are concerned about, maybe throw that in the chat or comment if you're watching live. Let me jump to the next slide here. So cyber resilience and how it differs from cybersecurity. Cybersecurity, obviously about defense. Cyber resilience is about what happens after something slips through. It reminds me of, I don't know if you guys remember this, but President George W. Bush was talking about terrorism and said, we have to be right 100% of the time, but they only have to be right once. Kind of the same logic in cybersecurity, right? We can have all the tools in place, all the controls in place, but if one attack gets through, that's where ultimately your resilience strategy kicks in. So kind of just throw it out to you guys. How do you explain to your clients kind of the difference between cybersecurity and defense versus the cyber resilience?
So for us, go ahead.
Well, for us, we've been preaching, top down. We're really going in. We're having the conversations with the owners, with the CEOs, so on and so forth, and trying to help them understand that they are the ones that has to push that down through the rest of the organization. We can talk to the staff, we can do everything, but if the owner CEO doesn't care, then it's not going to go anywhere. Just trying to help keep them safe. So, just trying to push that out.
Likewise for us, and also shifting the discussions with our clients from a mindset of, not if, but it's when. And then we're also having great success kind of focusing the discussion on business risk and understanding the total cost of ownership, or the TCO, of an avoidance only strategy. What happens when you lose full operational functionality of your business? What are the key systems that need to be up and going for you to generate revenue? Because at the end of the day, we're here protecting businesses that need to earn revenue or to generate revenue. So kind of shifting it towards a business risk conversation, as well as what you can do to help protect their business and the employees within.
Yeah. What I tell people is resilience is planning for the probable, whereas cybersecurity is planning for the inevitable. I think, when you look at that total cost of ownership budget, those cybersecurity measures, they're non-negotiable. You should load the boat on that as much as you possibly can. And then when it comes into your resilience strategy, your incident response planning, and kind of how you're structuring, getting the business back, in working order, that's where, you can build that strategy a little bit more gradually over time, but you need to kind of consider both, at any point in time when you're building that out. And so, it's really just a numbers game, right? You're all going to be attacked. How many of you are going to get attacked to the point where you're going to have to be on the recovery side of things? That's kind of a numbers game, and figuring out, okay, for us personally, that cost is too great not to, invest more on that side as well. Whereas other companies, you might start in one place with a plan to get to a better place over time.
Yeah, it's not if, it's when, right? So all the security measures and everything that we can put in place is definitely our best foot forward. It's the the brainstorming session that we have up front too is when it happens, right? What happens after it happens? What processes are in place that start to tackle the remediation and the restoration and the communication and all those components that need to happen in order to get things back up? And honestly, we've had some brainstorming sessions with folks, and the eyes really, really open. What happens to your operations when you can't get to the system? What happens when that happens? What happens to your cyber insurance policy when we didn't have all the boxes checked? So you know, I think that's probably the biggest hurdle to get over is just the brainstorming. It can happen. When it happens, what does it look like? What does my business look like when that happens? And that's when we see, you know, the lights start to kick on.
Being able to sit down and tabletop with your clients as to, you know, what would this actually look like an event? You know, what's your cost per hour of downtime? You know, extrapolate that over what happens if it's a week-long recovery. What does that do? So,
And the big one too is reputation.
yes.
Your reputation is damaged. It's very, very difficult. We can restore data most of the time, 90% of the time, but that reputation takes a good chunk of time to get restored.
Yeah, I think that's one of the challenges for the small versus, you know, the big enterprises. I think when it happens at the enterprise, they're just like, oh, those things happen, and, you know, they'll put out credit monitoring or whatever, and, you know, you don't even really think about it, right? Like, you're not going to stop going to the Marriott or those type of things. But small business, you're kind of like, well, I'm gonna stop working with Steve because, you know, he's apparently not protecting my data over there. So I think it's like, you know, it's a difference between small businesses and enterprises.
My favorite thing I've ever heard coming from a prospect is we were sitting in a board meeting talking about obviously their position, and one of them bluntly said, guys, I don't want my name to be in the paper tomorrow should we get hacked. And I'm like, that's brilliant. Yeah, that's exactly what would happen.
Yeah, I mean, in Pittsburgh here, you had, you know, the Target breach was through their HVAC system, and it was like, it's this little company here in Pittsburgh, this little HVAC company. So like, imagine every time someone searches for that breach, your name comes up. That would not be good.
And like in my case, I live in a smaller town. Word of mouth here travels extremely fast, and it will put a business under quicker than anything else.
Mm-hmm.
You know, where a lot of deals are still done, you know, with a handshake and kind of moving on. So your reputation is critical.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's jump to the next slide here. So, yeah, basically there's 6 core elements to resilience. I will jump to the next slide. Those are cybersecurity, incident response, business continuity, adaptability, employee awareness, and regulatory compliance. You know, we always push the idea of practice your plan. You know, I think Josh, you mentioned tabletop exercises. We do tabletop exercises. Obviously, that reveals like a lot of issues and that's where you want it to be revealed, at the tabletop instead of at a live environment. So yeah, I guess kind of, Josh, you could talk a little more about that, or maybe you know, what you guys see the biggest struggle with your clients as far as these 6 areas.
So, for us, the biggest struggle where we kind of continuously run into is just client awareness, or the employee awareness, getting the stakeholders, but also the end users to buy into the importance of, you know, cyber resilience and their defense in depth strategy. And then, you know, for us doing tabletop exercises, I like to actually involve the client in some of them so they can see where we're finding the holes as we're going through, whether it's practicing with our CERT team. And then we can figure out ways, whether it's policy that needs to be crafted to fill the hole, or is it some form of tool to fill the hole, or is it a business practice that just needs to change?
Yeah, we see the awareness side too as being the best opportunity at really leveling up everybody's game. Because again, we can secure the device, we can make sure that backups are in place, we can have some processes that are ready to roll. But it really, and obviously this even leaves the office, right? It's at home, it's everywhere we hear and see on the news. It's just understanding, as it was said earlier in this, is just things are adapting fast. You know, it's not just bad English anymore that helps us pick out what's the, you know, the threat versus non-threat. It's now books written, you great. Everything looks fantastic. So it's really becoming more difficult to understand what is and what isn't.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think, for us, it always starts with awareness. Like Tony was saying, we have the tools and the processes to get through a scenario. But what causes the most trouble is, the fact that like these bad actors, the ones that are really good at what they do, they understand human behavior really, really well. And they've engineered the attacks that they have to capitalize on what people are probably going to do. Like they understand that you don't want to jump through 4 hoops to sign into your work for the day. Like they understand all the things you don't want to do, and they try to create backdoors based on what they think you will and won't do. And they have a lot of data that they've run tests on to know, hey, these are the best attacks we have. And so getting people to be aware that, these things are kind of, absolutely essential. But then, in the long run, it's kind of an attrition game in the compliance side of it, and making sure that, everything in the organization is up to par, not just user behavior, but all of the, the systems and everything are in alignment with that strategy. And, it really does start with the person, understanding the necessity of everything, and getting people to buy into that it can be difficult for people who don't have the education and what it is that we're doing.
Yeah, agreed. And on that front too, and adaptability, is how nimble is the client. I know we have conversations with a lot of our clients that are, well, they don't want to adapt. They want to stay in the 1990s, file share and everything else. They don't want to adapt to current technology, just because it's unfamiliar to them. We're starting to have more and more conversations about incident response plans, with them as well, and trying to make sure that they're being proactive, on when not if, they have an incident, and we need to know what to do and how to help them, the best way that we can.
Absolutely.
John, just to add to your thought too, technology is supposed to enable, right? That's why people invest into technologies. It's supposed to enable something, right, to get to a goal. So if they're choosing not to look at newer technologies that can better enable them because they're concerned about what does that open me up for, what changes am I going to have to put in place, that's obviously not as productive as it could possibly be.
Everybody's a creature of habit, right? So it's oh, well, we've done it this way for 20 years. It's like, well, yeah, but this is a better way that has been proven to be that better way over the last 10 years. So it's time to move forward.
We've seen a lot of, well, we've always done it this way. Well, here I have solutions for you to make you more efficient, more secure, and make everybody's lives easier. But we've always done it this way. Well,
yeah. I guess even on our side, I just think about the different tools we have now from like 10 years ago. There just did not have this many cybersecurity tools in our stack. Life was so much simpler back then.
It really was.
Okay, don't get me wrong. I would love to go back to those times. Kinda, but we can't do that. We can't do that. Time moves on.
John's still on MySpace.
Don't give up my secret.
Somebody mentioned security awareness, and also kind of the. I think you're talking about kind of the leaders. I know often we find that if the leaders don't buy in, you're not going to be able to get really much traction with the entire company. Like if they don't get that the risk is really there and that you have to do something about it, you might as well just forget the rest of the company. Like we're not going to convince and make it happen if like the owner of the company or the executive leadership team is just like, well, we're not going to, I think that's what it was. Somebody was saying like, we're too small. It's not going to happen to us. Like there's almost no overcoming that. Like, have you guys like had anything successful to overcome that challenge?
Occasionally. sometimes you can win the hearts and minds of the employees and they start lobbying on your behalf, but that's about the only other way I've had success if I can't get the key stakeholders, the executive teams or the business owners to buy in. Sometimes you can sway the staff in general.
A lot of times the staff will know, like if you're working, we work with a lot of co-managed agreements where they'll have internal IT people, and those people know, right? They have at least some kind of training to understand, what the problems are. And I've literally had people where we've had the internal IT person try to sell the leadership and the executive management, and they're not on the same page, and then they end up coming back to us, after a sales engagement that happened like 3 months ago, saying, "Hey, we had a problem and we should have, done this sooner." And it's like, well, your employees are telling you we were on the same page, but again, it's like these people do speak different languages and they have different, perspective on the business and the financials and things like that. And so, I think that the onus is on us to really explain and explore all of that financial risk and say, hey, look, like you're adding an expense now, but on this longer timeline of 5 years or 10 years, you're protecting yourself from this amount of downside. And isn't that a wise investment, in the grand scheme of things? And I think when they see it that way, as someone who is a stakeholder in that business in the long term, it really changes the overall perception and then the attitude towards that with the company if they're, doing things the right way.
We really have to be able to speak two different languages. We have to be able to speak the tech, but then also be able to speak, executive summaries style to, business owners. What does this mean for their business, and why should they open up their, pocketbooks for it?
It's a lot about talking about the ROI, right? On, it is an investment. So cybersecurity, security in general is an investment, and it takes an investment, to get these things in place, but, okay, let's talk about, the damage to the reputation. Let's talk about, anything that could happen, due to an incident. Was it Tony that you mentioned the person said, they didn't want to see their name in the paper? Okay, well, once, what's that worth to you, as, to your company, to not have that done, and to be able to say, okay, well, this actor tried to get in, but, we've made the investment in security that stopped him.
Yeah, if you look at like 99% of business plans out there that are aggressive, where they are planning to scale the company, everyone thinks a scaling company in terms of upside. It's like, hey, when we get to this point, we're this much more profitable, but nobody looks at it in terms of downsides. It's like when we have this many holes to plug, if we don't start plugging them now for scale, we're opening ourselves up to way more downside than we were ever at risk for before. And I think you have to look at both sides of that. To be a good, successful business in any industry, you have to constantly be aware of both sides of that.
Yep. Absolutely.
Yeah. All right, let me keep this moving along so we get through all of our slides here. So the benefits of being cyber resilient, we talked a lot about, I guess, the downside, but maybe the of not being cyber resilient. What's the upside? I guess when people think about cybersecurity, again, they usually think, I think you guys were just talking about it, you usually see it as a cost center, not necessarily an investment. But resilience kind of flips that idea on its head. Resilience, it's an investment in continuity of your business, right? It keeps things operating when things go wrong. So I always like to tell clients, it's not if something breaks, it's how fast can you bounce back when it does. So the companies that do that, those are the ones that protect their reputation, as you guys mentioned, keep customers happy, don't lose revenue when they're trying to clean up a mess. So in your experience, any of the kind of the, I guess, have you guys had any clients or prospects that had to show they were resilient and kind of jump in and save the day?
So I definitely have one. So one of the biggest disasters we were able to avoid, so they had been under initial attack from a massive spear phishing campaign. As a direct result, we were able to sit down and implement new policies and technical controls. And we were able to kind of preempt the threat actors that came back. Basically, they were coming back to the well to try again. And they weren't able to establish even a foothold in there because of the new policies and stuff, because the company bought into that. And it was, to date in my career, that spearfish attack was the largest I've seen. It was right after, right before Thanksgiving. They had just sent out the annual bonuses. and they got an email campaign that hit them that says adjustment to your annual bonus. The click rate on that was horrible. But as a direct result, leadership at that particular company was more than happy to sit down and talk about cyber resilience and what they need to do to prevent something like this from happening again. And the controls and policies we put in place were very effective. So it was a huge win for the company as well as for ourselves.
Yeah, same here. We had a very similar issue, a similar timeline. There was like an attempted ransomware attack, but we had everything positioned correctly. We were able to lock it out very, very quickly. And, the client was originally hesitant, to go with those controls in the initial conversation. But coming out of that, they're like, what else can we do? What else can we do? Because this is the type of thing where, the number one benefit is saving the time and money, because you're taking, scenarios that could take, weeks and then breaking that down into days, or scenarios that could take days and breaking it down into hours. And within hours, we were able to completely secure their network and probably realistically save them hundreds of thousands of dollars. And they realized that immediately. They're like, wow, if this would have gone the other way, who knows if we would even be in business. And so, that's usually when it really hits home for people. But, luckily they had, kind of come over a little bit earlier on the controls we needed to stop that attack.
I go back to, thing that I started off, what are we seeing the most in the phishing campaigns, the who's sitting on the other end of the device. So from our experiences up to this particular point, this is proactive approach to with some of the abilities to train and test and, see who's going to click and who needs more education and, best practices when it comes to security. And knock on wood, obviously we've had we haven't had any of the stories that you guys have had yet, but we know that some of these proactive things, the educational side, getting to the end user, is going to help us stay there as long as possible. Again, it's not if, but it's when perspective.
We had, not us specifically, but one of our colleagues, that. They were just in the process of onboarding, a new client, and when they got the list of passwords and stuff from the losing provider, they're in the process of going through and changing things, and they're finding passwords that haven't been changed in 15, 20 years, and it was don't change this because this'll break or whatever. And they ended up getting breached. Like it was pretty soon. During their onboarding. They didn't even have the customer fully onboarded yet. And it was like they used one of those passwords that hadn't been changed. To be able to get in and whatnot. Now, how long were they in there? Since this customer was just getting onboarded to a new MSP. How long had the attacker been in the system? Using one of those credentials, and probably started seeing tools get changed and so on and so forth. So they decided they needed to act, sooner rather than later. It's just a matter of, little stuff like that, why, asking a question, of the individuals, why can't we change this password? What's really the motive behind not changing it? Is it because the third party that needs to do it, kind of like Jason, you mentioned the target attack, the third party needs that access, so it's easier on them to not change the password and whatnot, and that's just kind of how it starts.
And to add to that too is the average dwell time can be like 7 months before a threat actor actually initiates. So, just sitting there watching, harvesting stuff, and then, finally goes for the exfil. Probably adding those tools is likely what kicked that all off.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I know. We talked about the awareness. Like, I definitely think one of the big things is the end users being told that, like, hey, notify IT right away. And kind of like, you're not going to be in trouble, at least not this time, if it's always you, but, because I mean, multiple times I could think of where a user gave their password up to some phishing email, but it triggered, like, oh, crap, I just did that. And then they're contacting, we're able to kind of jump in real quick, lock everything down, make sure nobody's logging in from anywhere crazy, and change passwords, all that type of stuff. Also, I know this was way, we're talking about 10 years ago. This is probably 12 years ago. We had a large manufacturing client where somebody clicked on a ransomware email, and this is back when ransomware, they weren't in the environment setting everything up to take the whole thing down at once. It was more like just send out a bunch of stuff, and you're looking to encrypt with like one person. Well, this one person clicked it 5 o'clock in the afternoon before he left the office, and had probably 7 map drives. So like it was just going down through the file server and encrypting all the files. And again, this was before like you had Sentinel-1, all these different solutions that detect ransomware. And but luckily we had good backups. We had our backups backing up every hour. We were able to basically figure out who it was, where it was coming from, get his computer shut off, I think like 7 at night or something like that, and then recover the data because we tested the backups regularly. We went through those, quarterly. I think we were doing monthly with them, but monthly tests to validate the stuff's actually working, besides the built-in tests. I'm talking manual. But that's all about resilience too, like testing those backups, making sure they work. I'm sure you guys have a million backup disaster recovery stories.
Oh yeah.
I was just kind of thinking too, obviously we're looking at this from the benefits perspective on this slide. I think one key thing, small businesses all, or for the most part that I know, work with other businesses, and sometimes they're larger, sometimes they're similar sizes. But if you, one of the benefits to being cyber resilient is being able to tell your clients and prospective clients, hey, we're working through this type of plan should and when we have these, safeguards put in place to help protect you as my clients, whether you're in the financial industry, human resources industry, you work with larger companies like Target as a smaller vendor. I mean, that makes you, as one of those service providers, a really juicy target to hit, because you touch a lot of different businesses and have the opportunity to spread throughout a lot of different businesses and give the hackers better opportunities. So I think it kind of having some policy, being able to say that your business is cyber resilient, that's a great selling tool and a great tool to keep a client at the table. They should want to do business with a company that knows about cybersecurity and cyber resilience.
Yeah, not just as like a marketing part either, but like literally you can open up your company to completely different lines of business that weren't available before, because they do enforce a supply chain compliance. I know, Jason, you deal a lot with that with the CMMC, where, to do business in a certain industry, you actually have to have these things in place. So just, being a company that's smart and forward thinking, you apply this to your business, the investment, it doubles down, because now you're eliminating the downside risk, but you're also opening yourself to an entire marketplace of opportunity that you might not have even been able to work in because you didn't have those things in place, but now you do. And we have clients like that where, compliance is a prerequisite to work with them. And those are some of our best clients and have some of the best contracts on their end because they're able to, say that they can do that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, we're seeing too, even some of our clients that are outside the DoD, where, they're like the larger ones, they have third-party supply chain companies that you got to go through to get validated, to get on the list in order to be a service provider to them. So even there, it's like, for us, it's letting us do business with this. It's kind of like we're the feeder fish on the whale, but we gotta we gotta get our our third-party certification or validation. So I'm not sure if you guys see that either, but I think that's going to be more and more probably prevalent as time progresses here.
Yeah, and even existing standards like HIPAA, they're trending to become stricter and stricter, which means that it's going to become non-negotiable. So the sooner somebody's in a position to do this, the less they have to figure it out, as these things evolve, for sure.
Well, especially with HIPAA, we've got the new security rule change, which looks like it's going to hit probably about October, give or take, and it's got some significant teeth in it.
Yeah.
So
well, that's good, because it seems like most we talk about this all. Yeah, we got to be HIPAA. We're not that. Nobody's knocked on our door yet. So somebody will be knocking down a door.
I feel that in my soul.
It is amazing though how many doctors you go in and you talk to, and they're well, we don't need that. We don't need to be HIPAA, and like this prospect that I was talking about this morning. He's well, we don't bill Medicare or whatever, so we don't need HIPAA. I'm like, that don't have nothing to do with Medicare. It's like has to do with health information.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, but it's like it's just like just trying to get them to see there's more to it than what they may think. So.
One of the things too that I don't know, one of the benefits of being cyber resilient is if you have cybersecurity insurance and you have heavy cyber resilience, you're going to get better rates. So that can offset. One of the arguments I've used in the past is it'll help offset the cost of the tool by lowering your insurance premiums.
Yeah, or I mean, if you don't have a lot of this stuff, you can't even get cyber insurance.
Yeah.
So then you're just walking around,
We could do a whole nother webinar on cyber insurance in general. That's such a vast topic to do it the right way and what options are out there. Yeah, I mean, it's huge.
You mean I can't just check all the boxes and get it?
You can until you need a claim.
Pay out.
I actually have that on the next slide as a comment.
All right, on that case, let's jump to the next slide here. All right, so the 5 key challenges, or no, I don't think it's 5, but the key challenges for achieving resilience. I think we got evolving threat landscape, resource constraints, complexity, and awareness. I guess again, I think I mentioned this earlier. One of the biggest challenges I see is when leadership kind of abdicates their responsibility of risk management down to the IT guy, or I mean, I've had some recent conversations where they've abdicated CMMC compliance to administrative assistant, or someone just started yesterday. And assuming that person's got qualified, or they got the tools to that, or the processes, and it's just obviously setting everybody up for failure. So I see that one as big challenges from my side that I see a lot. I don't know, what do you guys see as the biggest challenges for achieving cyber resilience?
I think mindset, is one of the biggest. I mean the client, prospect, our customer, whatever you want to call them, we're going in there and trying to change that mindset. Just because they haven't had to focus on security, until really the last 10 years. I mean, maybe less. It's been people really just kind of that day-to-day, this is how we've always done it. It's like, well, the attacks are changing, and we have to adapt, and you have to adapt to those changes. You can't do things like you did yesterday. You can't do things like you did last hour, to this hour. The attackers are out there ready to come in, knocking at the door.
The mindset, and then also, when it boils on down, it's money. With shifting, like with the economy shifting, it's getting harder and harder to get stakeholders to prioritize investment and continue to prioritize investment in the maintenance of like previously deployed systems or new solutions. It's great. You can invest in a lock after your door's kicked in, but let's try to prevent the door from being kicked in the first place. We try to make the barrier for entry as low as possible, and even adopt, a phased approach for a lot of our clients. And then kind of strategically plan out and roadmap out how we can get them to become more cyber resilient over a long period of time, so they're not just faced with all this upfront cost. But even small steps is better than none.
I think it's a mix too, with obviously the mindset, budgeting, but the complexity side of it too. I think that there is this. Well, I am a small, to mid-sized business. The big boys, they're able to do this with lots of people and lots of tools and big budgets. And I think at the end of the day, that's just not true, right? What companies like ours help to provide is cost-effective ways, to get there, to be like the big boys, right? To have the controls in place, to have the processes put in, ready to be run. Josh said, like you said, to help make sure that that door doesn't get kicked in the first place. So I think it's just a continued awareness that gets driven, and it's for everybody. It's not just for the big guys and gals out there that are running these large businesses. It's for everybody.
I think too on that, it doesn't have to be that complex. And I think a lot of kind of goes to mindset is a lot of the misconceptions out there is that it putting this into place, putting cyber security, cyber resilience, whatever that plan is going to be complex, and it doesn't have to be. It's just a matter of having a conversation and putting specific tools in place and just kind of going down a list. It doesn't all have to be done today, but let's get a plan together to say, okay, this month we're going to do this. Next month it's this. Next quarter, we're gonna look at adding these 3 tools or what have you.
And to add on to that real quick is, say you can't swing a tool this quarter, can you afford the time to sit down and craft a policy that'll better help protect you?
Mm-hmm.
And what's kind of interesting too about our industry and our perspective on this is we are really a generalist industry. Some of us will serve one, vertical only, but most of us are working with companies all across the economy. So our perspective is a little bit more holistic on this. And kind of to Josh's point, like the changes in the economy, we see it first because we're one of the first things that they try to cut out of the budget, when the things shift. And like a perfect example of that budget becoming a bigger thing is like, for anyone who's doing anything in medical, these small doctors' offices are getting hammered by the insurance companies now, trying not to pay out on claims ever since COVID, for whatever reasons. And so like, they're like, hey man, like the insurance companies just aren't cooperating the way they used to. And so like, how do we justify this? And so like, we have to be able to come in there and give them the perspective and say like, yeah, but like this to you can be the competitive advantage that you have against that, local hospital system and stuff like that. If you have these controls in place, and if you can, align your budget with, making the right moves at the right time, it's doable. It's doable. And, we know it and we see it in different industries all the time. And just kind of having the planning figured out is the first step. And that can get you around the budget thing over time for sure.
Yeah, I think the other thing about our industry is, we're pretty good at process. I mean, it's like basically if you want to have a good MSP, you got to have processes, procedures, you got to get better at them and be more efficient. And I think like most small, medium-sized businesses, at least not maybe in their core function, right? If they're a manufacturer, they're obviously really good at building their products, but like kind of the other areas like IT, if they have an IT guy or a couple IT people, they probably start off just breaking things or not breaking things, but fixing things that are broken. And, they're not necessarily great at developing processes and procedures. So again, I think it's like where companies like us can come in, and I know we mentioned co-manage earlier. We do a lot of co-manage as well. We can kind of bring those skill sets that we have for processes and procedures and developing policies and building reoccurring processes that we and walking through frameworks, which I think we have on a slide or 2 here, that we can kind of bring in, which I think we get spoiled and we just think that everybody's process driven. But working with some larger clients, you're like, well, you guys don't really have a lot of processes here. So I think that's another big challenge I see. All right. So better hurry up. It's gone a lot quicker than I thought. All right. So practical steps. I'm going to jump to the next slide. We were just talking about this. In this CSF, obviously we love using the frameworks. It makes life a lot easier. We don't have to try and figure it all out ourselves. We just follow a framework. Obviously the CSF gives a nice structure without being overwhelming. It's, even if you just start off basic, like identifying things, identifying what you're protecting, which is, a lot of companies still don't do that. I mentioned recently on LinkedIn that like, I don't think most companies know what their cloud applications are. Like they think they know a couple core ones, but if you really audited like all the stuff people in the company are using,
Hundreds.
there's like Yeah, there's hundreds of them, and you'll ask them like, how many, what cloud apps you use, and they give you like 3. So, just identifying is a big thing. But what do you guys like? What do you think is kind of the first step that you would take?
That's just it. It's starting, and it's starting with a conversation with the client of, we also, have standardized pretty much on NIST, for our clients, so as we're starting to have the conversations with them, it's okay. We're going to take you through, through this program, in this framework, to see, to get everything ironed out. And, most of our clients haven't even thought about it, and even those that are in the manufacturing, space for military or, or aircraft or something like that, that is definitely going to need CMMC stuff. They're kind of behind the times, so to speak.
Yeah.
The identification is key to, I know you hit on that a little bit there, but I think using frameworks is a fantastic thing. The big thing for us is trying to take the practical approach down to what they need. These frameworks, they're large, they're holistic, they cover a lot of stuff too. But maybe going back to the previous slide as well, some of the challenges of complexity is really trying to understand what fits my business, what do I need to be focusing on out of this, page after page document, and what's going to move the needle the most for us. I think that's where we see largest successes in the framework.
Yeah. For us, it's, identify what critical data you cannot operate without first, and then work backwards from there. What is the single most critical components of your business? Let's get those identified. If you could even just start with that, the basics of the most critical systems, you're getting your foot in the door. You can build off of that and build momentum, but what is the single most critical piece to your organization? And then that will also help you understand what you need to protect, what you're going to need to be able to, set up detections for. And then ultimately, when it comes down to recovery, if you're already being dropped a ransom note, it's too late. So understanding what that is, and then establish your priorities along the same lines of, okay, this system, then this system, understand the workflow, a process diagram for your own organization. Jason kind of touched on it on the last slide where, being an MSP, being in IT, we have to understand process because we work with a lot of different organizations, a lot of different entities, a lot of different business owners. So we have to understand all their processes for their business as well as our own. But yeah, understanding those critical components first, and then you can work from there to flesh it out. But getting just a general sketch of your environment is what I would say is the most critical to getting started.
I'm a big advocate of working backwards as well. I think you have to look at what recovery looks like on your worst day and start there, and then start to identify, working backwards from there to kind of work towards the best scenario you can and eliminate as much risk as possible.
The other thing I would say is, make it work for you and commit. Make it a commitment, and hold yourself accountable to that commitment.
Yeah. Do you guys do we create cyber steering committees so that we have that reoccurring conversation? Are you guys doing that as well?
Once a month with each one of our clients. We have key stakeholders from various, whether it's department heads, C-suite individuals. We do a lot of work with local and county governments. So sometimes it's, directors from different departments. And so we sit down once a month with each one of our clients and find out what's hurting them and what we can do, what initiatives we can take. And we also use it as an opportunity to roadmap and identify, okay, this is taking longer, or hey, we're doing this faster so we can move maybe this timeline up. Does this work for everyone? And just have everybody have a seat at the table so that they have some ownership in their own cyber resilience and their own cybersecurity.
Yeah. I know in those meetings, especially if you can get multiple people in the leadership team in them, not just like one person. And you start talking about risk, and then they start bouncing off of each other, and then all of a sudden it starts becoming apparent, like, wow, this is a big issue. This isn't like versus if you just talk to one person and they, maybe they don't want to deal with it, so they kind of push it off. But if all of a sudden you got, say, sales in there, and they're saying their sales team's not gonna be able to sell because if that system's down, they can't do X, Y, and Z, then all of a sudden it's like you get this interplay between the leaders that really help drive it forward.
Yeah, I found that to be the case as well. We definitely try to loop in as many people as possible because, stakeholders all look at things in a completely different way. And there's always something that you have a blind spot towards that someone is going to be able to bring to the table. It's why panels and stuff like this are nice, is because you just get more perspective and then you're able to make better decisions.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, if they're not paying attention, you just say, we're going to set the password policy to 30 characters, changes every 30 days. Say someone speaks up.
Good.
It's the constant balance between, being able to work efficiently and being secure. We're constantly having to ride that fine line of, if I had my way, I had a high school kid job shadowing me for a senior project. It's like, if I had my way, everybody would have a notepad and notepad and a pen.
Yeah.
And that's it. Perfectly secure.
Yeah,
It is it.
No, not in the slightest.
You gotta keep like a lighter and if somewhere to like get rid of that every day. They gotta like rip out a new page, and we'll figure it out.
Yeah. You got them writing invisible ink on this.
There you go.
Piece of paper. Anything else on this slide?
No, I think that pretty well covered it.
All right, so I don't see anything in the Q&A here. I guess if anybody has anything, you could pop it in. If not, we will wrap it up here. All right. So I guess before we close out here, obviously you guys can connect with all of us on LinkedIn. This is our QR codes. It'll take you straight to our page. Any parting thoughts from anybody before we wrap up?
I would say getting started is, I know it can be intimidating, scary. It's the barrier to entry isn't that high. And there's plenty of people, any one of us here on the panel would love to answer any questions to help you get moving forward.
Yeah, I would agree. Just educate yourself at the level that you're at, and make it something you do regularly. Like subscribe to like a news feed of cybersecurity news or something, and just be aware of the dynamics, because a lot of the underlying principles is the same. And the more you familiarize yourself with that, the more you start to intuitively make better decisions. And I think that's the basis of starting to work towards strategy, is just understanding the dynamic in the first place.
Yeah, just start somewhere, and I don't know if you're watching in, and if maybe you're not the C-suite or above, but start putting thoughts into their minds, of those above you, and getting that buy-in, and and see what you can do there.
I would just add too, not to plug us a little bit more, but find a great partner out there that can help this process out. I totally understand how fast time flies and how many priorities there are out there. So find a great partner who can help you through this process, and gosh, things will go just so much better.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So planning for what happens after an incident, that's what resilience is all about. The after, not the before. So obviously, you're working with an MSP or you have an IT department, they should be helping you with this. If they're not, you probably should have a conversation about that. So we're all here. We like to work with companies, help make them more secure, more efficient. So again, you can connect with us on LinkedIn. Yeah, we're looking to have these calls once a month covering different topics. So if you enjoyed it, let us know, and we'll see you next time. Thanks, guys.
I'm good. Thanks.
Thanks, everybody.